Hey everyone, it's Matt here with Nightrun Studio, and so far in our Spells and Chess series, we've added a bunch of spells and got our spell hotbar working nicely. However, it would be sure nice if there was a way to actually learn new spells. And so in this video, we're going to create spell items that we can collect on the map in order to have them added to our repertoire of spells. In the next and final video of this mini-series, we'll add treasure chests so that you can lock these items away. That's where we're headed in this video. Let's get started. We're going to be using a new asset pack for this one, and this is another one by Brolov, the same artist who created the character we're using for this series. And this one's pretty awesome. It's got all kinds of cool stuff to make your scene look better. You can download this one for free, and it is free for commercial as well as personal use. Just if you're getting it free, be sure to leave a comment or follow Brolov to help him out. Alright, once you've got this downloaded, you can find it in your downloads folder and drag it right into your sprites. From there, let's go ahead and open it up, head into decorations, and just to make this easy, I'm actually going to search scroll. I'm going to take scroll 1 here, and as we do with all of our assets it seems, we're going to set this one to 16 pixels per unit, make sure that we use point no filter, and then 32-bit. At this point we can apply those changes, and we can drag this right into our scene. Now I'm going to be honest with you, we could make this really easy. Just slap a collider on this and make it so that when we hit it, it automatically tells our magic to add it to the available spells and then just calls the spell manager show spells method and poof, we'd be done. However, then we wouldn't be set up very well for things like items and armor and weapons in the future. And so we're going to take a slightly slower route to create something that's going to scale really nicely throughout this project. So first of all, this scroll isn't always going to be a scroll, so let's rename this as a sprite, and it'll just be the representation of whatever item we're going to collect. We'll then create an empty object, and this is going to be our loot object, which is going to handle all the logic for this collectible, and we'll just keep the sprite separate. We can go ahead and add a collider here, and this is just going to represent the area where you can collect it. It won't actually have physics interactions, so we can make this a circle and make it nice and large, and we'll just make sure to set it as is trigger. Now whenever we collect an item, I'd like to add some pop-up text that says what we've collected, so let's add a UI Text Mesh Pro object here. And since it's the first time we've done that in this project, we should get this pop-up here asking us to import the things for Text Mesh Pro. There's actually 2 to do, so if yours disappears after the first, it might be hiding in behind like mine is right now. You will want to add those extras and examples if you want to have different fonts to choose from. Now, if you're using an older version of Unity and you don't have Text Mesh Pro automatically, you may need to go to Window, Package Manager, and this will look different depending upon your version, but you want to not look at what's in project, but instead what is in the Unity registry. You can then search Text Mesh Pro and download it. Alright, with that done, let's double click our canvas, and just like with our UI, it is a massive overlay canvas with the text in the middle, which, when I click on scene, doesn't look too bad. However, when we play the game, we can see that it's moving around whenever the player moves, and clearly that's not what we want. We want this text to stay with its item. So let's just click on the canvas itself, and here we want to put it into world space, and as good practice, let's add a sorting layer that renders in front of everything else so we'll always see the text. I'll call this layer UI layer, and then just make sure that we put this canvas on it. That way the words don't get lost behind items or things that may be in our scene. Alright, next up, our canvas is still massive, so let's open up the Rect Transform. I'm going to begin by zeroing it out so that it's exactly centered on the item itself. And then we're just going to change its size to something much smaller. Let's try 6 by 1. That's looking okay. We'll then grab our text. We can just click on the Rect Transform here. I'm going to hold down Option or Alt on PC to expand it to match its parent. And already that's looking much better. We're then just going to change our size as it's still enormous. I'm going to go with 0.6. I'm also going to set this to be the Bangers font. We can then center it within that text box. Next, I'm just going to grab the canvas and drag it a little above the item. Now what I'd like to have happen is whenever I collect the item, it will have the item fade out, and then this text will appear saying what we've collected. It'll drift up into the sky and sort of fade out as it goes. So let's drag our animation pane into view. I'm going to click the parent loot object here, as that way if we animate the parent, we'll have control over all the children. I'll then head to animations. Let's go ahead and call this one collect loot. So first off, let's hit the record button and then click on our sprite, and by about 20 frames in, let's go to our color and set its alpha to 0, so that over those first 20 frames, it'll just fade out the item itself. While still in record mode, let's grab the canvas now and just drag it up a little ways, and that'll record it going from the beginning up. That looks pretty decent. All right, and now let's actually add some fade to the words. So I'm gonna click on the Text Mesh Pro specifically, Then down in color here, just turn its alpha off. Now we'll need to move that around. I want the color to be off only by the very end. And then I'll grab this beginning one here where it's at full alpha and drag that towards the end so it just fades out in those last 10 frames. So it pops up and then fades out at the end. All right, that looks pretty good, or at least good enough to be able to test. Now if we pop into the animator, we obviously don't want the collect loot to play by default. Let's create just an empty state here called idle. We'll set that as our default. And then we'll just call the collect loot from our code. At this point, I'm just gonna click on the Text Mesh Pro itself and make sure that its alpha is set to 0 so that it's not showing up before we actually collect it. And with that, we can grab the loot and just kind of set it down on the ground. I'm also just gonna turn off these dummies so they're not in the way. All right, we're ready to get scripting at this point, so let's head into our scripts. I'll create a new folder for collectibles as we're gonna have a couple by the end of this. We'll create our first script and just call this one Collectible SO. Now you may remember back with our spells that we have this general spell SO that acts as sort of a base to our scriptable objects, and then we do specific logic in each of the spell SOs for how they're gonna function. We're gonna do something similar here because whenever we collect a loot, we don't wanna just be able to collect spells and then when we collect items later on have to wire that all in separately. So instead we're gonna create one parent scriptable object called Collectible SO, so that we can right now set up our loot object so that it will work for every type of loot we may have down the road. I'll show you what that looks like. All right, so in our Collectible SO, let's get rid of the start and update methods and make sure that it inherits from scriptable object. At this point, we're just gonna have a couple of references that will belong to every collectible we have. We'll have a public string for item name and then also a public sprite for the icon. We're also gonna have one method that every collectible will need to have. This is going to be abstract as will allow the collectibles themselves to determine how they run it, but all of them are going to have something called collect, and that collect is going to need a player reference so that it can talk to the player's different scripts. All right, that's all we need for this Collectible SO, except that you'll notice there's a little error here. We can't have an abstract method here if we don't also make the class abstract, which just means we'll never actually create a Collectible SO, but when we create the things that inherit from it, they'll be invoking all of this logic along with themselves. So now if we go into spell SO, we can actually get rid of the spell name and icon as those now belong to the parent. And then we also want to make sure that it inherits now from Collectible SO. Here we're also going to override that new collect method, which again will take in the player. And essentially whenever we collect one of these spells, we want it to talk to our player, as that is what holds the reference to our magic core component. And then we're going to tell magic that we want to learn this spell, and we'll pass along whichever spell SO this happens to be. Now we don't have that method yet, so let's pop over to magic and make that happen. So in magic, what we really just want to do is add a new spell to our available spells, and then pass along to Spell UI Manager that it needs to show that spell. So let's create that new learn spell method. It's going to take in a spell SO so it knows what spell it's adding. Here we're just going to do a check to see if available spells already contains it. If it doesn't, then we are going to add this spell SO to our list. Next, anytime we change our spells, we want to make sure that our available spells current index gets set appropriately. So if we remove spells down the road, we don't want it to still think spell 1 is selected if there is no spell 1. So we're just going to clamp the index somewhere between 0 and the number of available spells we have. That way it never selects an empty slot. We can then tell our Spell UI Manager that it needs to show all of our available spells. And finally, if after all of this, our available spells count is greater than 0, we just want to highlight whatever the current spell is that's equipped. Now we can't quite test this yet as we don't actually have a way to collect our loot. So let's create a new script and call this one loot. Now inside of this, we'll get rid of the start and update methods. Then we just need a couple of references so that we can actually test this. First of all, it's going to need to know where the player is, so let's add that reference, as well as a serialized private reference to which collectible SO this loot represents. Next, we're going to add an onTriggerEnter2D method, and here what we're going to do is anytime something collides with this object, it's going to try to fill its player reference by checking the collision object and getting a component called player. Now, if it's not a player, the player will stay null. And so on this next line, we'll check, and if player is null, we can just return. We don't need to execute any further. However, if it does find a player component, that means the player's just walked into it and we need to actually collect this item. Our collect item method will be really simple to start, though we're going to add more logic as we go, which is why we're going to separate it out here and not just leave it in onTriggerEnter. So first of all, we want to tell our collectible SO that it needs to call its collect method. And at this point, we also need to pass along that player reference that we just got. The other thing we want to do is just destroy the item so that it doesn't remain in the scene. We'll wait 1 second so it has time to play its animation first. Now it should be testable at this point, but first let's just handle the player walking away. So we're going to have an on trigger exit method here, and all this is going to do is just if the object that's leaving is in fact the player, we're going to nullify that player reference. That way it won't be possible to collect this specific item again until we've re-entered the trigger. Back in Unity, let's click on our loot object and make sure to add this loot script. It is going to need a reference. I'm just going to throw our heal spell in there. And while we're at it, let's just click on that heal spell, as now we have this new item name that we need to fill in. I'm just going to call this one heal scroll, but for the moment it won't do anything. It will when we add our text in just a moment. I'm also just going to go to my player sprite, and here in our magic component, let's just zero out all of our available spells. I'm going to leave the current index as 1 as the way we've set up our code that should reset itself when we collect the item. And sure enough, when we get in the game, we can collect the item. It took a little to disappear, but we'll fix that, and you'll notice our current index did go to 0, and we are able to use that spell now. All right, this is coming along. Let's just make it look a little nicer. So back in loot, let's add a reference to our animator. We'll just call it anim, as well as a reference to our TextMesh Pro text, though we will have to add the line using TM Pro in order to have access to this library. Now we can come on down to our collect method. First of all, let's get our item message text and just make sure that the text within that component says something. So we'll have it say found, and then we'll just add the Collectible SO's item name. At this point, we'll tell our animator to play the collect item animation. Now if we pop into Unity, let's just check in our animator, and actually I called mine collect loot. It's important that this state name exactly match what you put in your code. Back in Unity, we do want to set up our loot, so let's just click on that, make sure to drag in its own animator, as well as the text that we've got here. And at the moment, I'm noticing that somehow my sprite ended up as a child of the canvas. We don't want it popping up when the canvas does, so I'm just going to set it up here as a sibling of the canvas instead. Now we can test, and okay, things are mostly working, except you can see that our animation is on loop there. So we'll just find our collect loot animation and make sure to turn off that loop time. Now when we play, it's actually working pretty nicely, though I can see that text is a little hard to read. So in the animation here, I'm just going to drag it out so that it stays up at the top for just a little longer, and we have a little more time to read it here. I think that'll work much nicer. At this point, we can go to our prefabs folder and drag our loot in there to make multiple copies. I'm then actually just going to duplicate it, and for the second one here, let's just add a different collectible SO, and then we can change the sprite that we're using to say scroll 2. I haven't actually set up scroll 2, so you will have to set up your pixels per unit. Set it to 0.0 filter and 32-bit, then apply, and then it'll be looking just fine. All right, now we can collect both spells, and once they're collected, they get properly added to our hotbar, and they're both usable. All right, that's working pretty nicely, and we are nicely set up both for our next video, where we'll add some treasure chests to lock up these spells, but also for the future, when we want to add other types of items and perhaps armor and weapons. Hope you found that one useful, and I hope to see you in the next video. Until then, this is Matt with Nightrun Studio. Cheers.